Right now, there are entire civilizations buried under oceans, hidden under jungle canopies, sitting underwater off the coast of Cuba and India and Egypt. Civilizations with flush toilets older than Rome, cities bigger than ancient London sitting in Illinois. Empires so powerful and so advanced that when Europeans found their buildings, they literally refused to believe the people who lived there actually built them. And every single one of these civilizations was either deliberately erased from history, quietly removed from maps, or just never put in any American textbook ever, because the truth is stranger and more shocking than anything Hollywood has ever made up. There are 111 of them, and by the end of this video, you are going to question everything you were ever taught in history class. So hit subscribe right now because this list is about to get absolutely insane. 1. So picture this. It is the year 1250 AD, and sitting right across the river from what is now St. Louis, Illinois, there is a city so massive it has more residents than London, England at the same exact time. This place is called Cahokia, and its central mound is literally bigger by volume than the Great Pyramid of Giza. Nobody told Americans this in school, and that is honestly criminal. Then within 200 years of being at its absolute peak, every single person just vanished completely. No war, no note, no forwarding address, gone. 2. So somewhere around 3,500 years ago, some absolute legends in Louisiana decided to move 53 million cubic feet of dirt entirely by hand. No machines, no wheels, nothing. Just pure human stubbornness. Why, and they stacked it all into a series of perfectly concentric ridges plus one giant bird-shaped mound that is visible from the sky. This place is called Poverty Point, and honestly, the name does not do it justice at all. The wildest part is they left almost zero other traces behind. No big villages, no massive graveyards, just the mounds and a whole lot of unanswered questions. 3. Picture a Greek explorer named Pytheas sailing north in 325 BC, coming back home, and telling everyone he found a mysterious island where the sea was literally congealed and the sun never set. Every single person laughed at him for centuries and called him a liar and a lunatic. The place he was describing was probably Iceland or Norway, but nobody believed him at the time. His account survived anyway, and historians named this mystery land Thule. The guy was basically reporting real geography and got roasted for it like he showed up to a party on the wrong day. 4. Somewhere in Ukraine and Romania, about 5,000 years ago, a civilization called the Cucuteni Tripilia people were doing something so bizarre that modern archaeologists genuinely cannot explain it with a straight face. So every single 60 to 80 years, these people would burn their own cities completely to the ground. Every building, every structure, everything, and then rebuild the entire city from scratch on the exact same spot. They did this deliberately for 2,000 straight years. Not because of enemies, not because of accidents, just pure choice. Nobody knows why. It is the ancient world's most committed renovation project. 5. Europe's first great civilization was absolutely thriving on the island of Crete for 1,500 years. The Minoans had running water, multi-story buildings, and a writing system called Linear A that they used for everything. Here is the part that should genuinely bother every American sitting comfortably with Google Translate on their phone. Not a single archaeologist on Earth has ever decoded one word of Linear A, not one. And the entire written record of one of history's greatest civilizations is sitting right there on thousands of tablets, and humanity collectively cannot read a single sentence of it. 6. The island of Malta is sitting in the Mediterranean acting completely normal, but underneath that chill vacation vibe is something wild. The people of Malta built the world's oldest freestanding stone structures 5,500 years ago, a full 1,000 years before Stonehenge even existed, using construction techniques that modern engineers still cannot fully explain. Then, in one of history's rudest plot twists, those builders just vanished completely. No gradual decline, no migration trail, nothing. A totally different group of people showed up with zero cultural connection to the builders. Someone else just moved into the greatest construction achievement on Earth. 7. In 1996, a skeleton was found eroding out of a riverbank in Washington state, and scientists got very excited until the excitement turned into total confusion. Kennewick Man, as they called him, was 9,000 years old, but his facial features did not match any known Native American group at all. Then, DNA analysis came back and traced his ancestry to a completely unexpected ancient population that nobody had accounted for in the official story of who first came to America. The entire neat and tidy timeline of human arrival in the Americas started quietly falling apart right there in Washington state. 8. Port Royal, Jamaica. In 1692 was basically the Las Vegas of the Caribbean. Filthy rich, morally flexible, and absolutely packed with pirates, are merchants and chaos, earning itself the nickname the wickedest city on earth. Then on June 7th at exactly 11:43 in the morning, a massive earthquake hit, and the entire city slid into the sea in under 2 minutes. When divers eventually found the ruins, they discovered furniture still arranged in rooms, buildings standing at weird angles underwater, and one man's watch that had literally stopped at 11:43 a.m., the exact moment the city went under. History preserved in real time. 9. Ancient Greek and Phoenician writers spent a lot of energy describing a fabulously wealthy kingdom in southwest Spain absolutely overflowing with silver, called Tartessus. And then around 500 BC, it simply stopped existing with zero explanation. No conquest story, no disaster account, nothing. For centuries, historians argued about whether it was even real. See, then, in 2022, satellite imagery started picking up strange circular structures buried in the Spanish marshes in exactly the right location. An entire kingdom that controlled ancient Mediterranean trade might have been hiding under a swamp this whole time, and nobody bothered to look properly until satellites did the job. 10. Official archaeology had a very confident answer for when humans first arrived in America, and that answer was 13,000 years ago. End of discussion, do not argue. Then researchers confirmed a site in Chile dated to 14,800 years. Then a site in South Carolina came back at 50,000 years, which is not a typo. The entire first Americans timeline that was taught in every school across the country is currently being rewritten in real time by living scientists having very uncomfortable conversations with each other. Everything in the textbooks is either wrong or dangerously incomplete, and new digs keep making it worse every single year. 11. The Picts controlled Scotland for 600 years and carved the most elaborate and mysterious symbol stones ever found. Symbols that appear nowhere else on Earth, on any continent, in any other culture, ever. Then, after 843 AD, they simply disappeared from history, absorbed into the Kingdom of Scotland in a way that completely erased their entire identity, their language, their traditions, everything. Historians basically describe this as a peaceful merger, but the result looks a lot less like a merger and a whole lot more like one culture got swallowed whole and the other one pretended it never happened. 12. South Florida had a civilization called the Calusa, who never farmed a single day in their entire existence and somehow still built an empire that controlled 50 other tribes across the entire state. They constructed artificial islands, engineered massive watercourts, and ran one of the most sophisticated fishing-based economies in the ancient Americas. Then the Spanish showed up twice trying to conquer them and got sent home embarrassed both times. Spanish records actually describe the Calusa chief as the single most powerful leader they had encountered anywhere in the entire Americas. A fishing society built Florida's greatest empire, and history barely mentions them. 13. Rome basically had an older, cooler neighbor called the Etruscans, who built sophisticated cities across Italy, invented early engineering techniques, and created artistic achievements so impressive that historians spent centuries incorrectly attributing everything to the Greeks. When Rome rose to power, it absorbed the Etruscan civilization almost completely, and then quietly took credit for most of what it inherited. Their language is still only partially understood today, and their exact origin is one of archaeology's longest-running arguments. Rome essentially did to the Etruscans what that one group project member does to everyone else's work at the last minute. 14. On Florida's Gulf Coast. About 2,000 years ago, a group of people built a complex of mounds at a place now called Crystal River, and then maintained active trade relationships with cultures living 1,500 miles away in Ohio for centuries. The same mound site was used continuously for 1,600 straight years, now making it one of the longest occupied archaeological sites in all of North America. Ancient Florida was apparently a major hub of a continent-wide trading network that connected cultures from the Gulf all the way to the Great Lakes, and most Americans have absolutely no idea this was happening in their own backyard. 15. Before the Greeks built their famous civilization, they found massive stone walls already standing at Athens, Mycenae, and Tiryns. Walls built from individual blocks weighing up to 20 tons each. The Greeks had zero explanation for how these walls got there, so they invented one, deciding that only a race of giants called Cyclops could possibly have moved stones that heavy. They literally named the walls Cyclopean after the giants they assumed built them. The actual builders were a pre-Greek people called the Pelasgians, about whom almost nothing is known. Greece built its entire legendary civilization on top of someone else's foundations and then forgot to give credit. 16. About 3,000 years ago in the Ohio Valley, a culture called the Adena started building elaborate burial mounds and filling them with extraordinary grave goods, copper ornaments, carved stone tablets, decorated pottery, all pointing to a highly organized and spiritually sophisticated society. The genuinely strange part is that archaeologists cannot find any precursor culture. The Adena did not slowly develop from something simpler. They appeared in the archaeological record already fully formed, with no developmental period, no earlier primitive version, nothing before them. In an entire sophisticated culture with no origin story, just showed up one day in Ohio and started building. 17. Central Europe had a Bronze Age civilization called the Unitis culture that quietly controlled all of Europe's metal trade and accumulated so much wealth it would embarrass modern hedge fund managers. Their greatest artifact, the Nebra sky disk, is a 3,600-year-old bronze disk decorated with gold showing the sun, moon, and stars, making it the oldest confirmed astronomical instrument ever found anywhere on Earth. An ancient European civilization mapped the night sky in detailed bronze artwork, while most of the world was still figuring out basic agriculture. This disk sat buried in a German field until treasure hunters accidentally dug it up in 1999. 18. A group of hunters called the Clovis people, named after a small town in New Mexico where their distinctive spear points were first discovered, somehow managed to spread across the entire length of both North and South America in under 1,000 years. Archaeologists call it the fastest human migration ever recorded in history. They crossed mountains, jungles, deserts, and rivers covering 2 entire continents in roughly the same time it takes some American families to pay off a car loan. Where the Clovis people originally came from before all this running is still actively debated by researchers who cannot agree on a single answer. 19. An entire ancient Cretan city called Olus, believed to have housed around 40,000 people at its peak, is now completely submerged in a lagoon off the coast of Crete. Its location is clearly marked on ancient maps. Ancient writers mentioned it regularly, and you can actually snorkel over its ruins today and see the outlines of streets beneath the water. Despite all of this, almost no serious archaeological excavation has ever been properly funded for this site. A city the size of a mid-sized American town is sitting underwater fully intact, and the archaeological community has essentially responded with a collective shrug. 20. Plato sat down in 360 BC and wrote a very specific description of a powerful naval empire with concentric rings of land and water, enormous wealth, advanced engineering, and a capital city built to exact measurements, and then said it all sank into the ocean in a single day. For 2,000 years, scholars have argued whether Atlantis was a real historical account or just a philosophical story Plato invented to make a political point. The frustrating part is that Plato was extremely specific with the details, specific enough that researchers keep finding real ancient sites that match pieces of his description uncomfortably well. 21. Europe's largest Neolithic civilization was quietly sitting in what is now Serbia, doing something that has archaeologists genuinely rattled even today. The Vinca culture was scratching a series of symbols onto their pottery about 1,000 years before the Sumerians in Mesopotamia invented what everyone calls the world's first writing system. Some researchers look at these Vinca symbols and call them proto-writing, meaning an actual structured communication system predating everything else on record. If they are right, and the debate is very much still happening, then Europe had writing before Mesopotamia did, and every history textbook on Earth has the story completely backwards. 22. There is supposedly a vast empire called Tartaria that once covered enormous stretches of Eurasia, and some researchers claim it was deliberately scrubbed from official maps during the 18th century in one of history's most ambitious cover-up operations. Mainstream historians reject the empire theory entirely, but then run into an awkward problem because thousands of extraordinarily ornate and sophisticated buildings from the 1800s exist across multiple continents, and nobody can fully explain who funded them, who built them, or why they all share such strikingly similar architectural styles. The buildings are real, they are sitting there right now, and the explanations for them remain genuinely unsatisfying. 23. In 1864, a zoologist named Philip Sclater noticed something that genuinely puzzled him. Lemur fossils kept appearing in both Madagascar and India, two places separated by an entire ocean, and he could not figure out how the same animal got to both locations. His solution was to propose an entire sunken continent between them that he named Lemuria, which he believed had connected the two landmasses before sinking beneath the Indian Ocean. This was completely legitimate scientific reasoning at the time before plate tectonics existed as a concept. And he was using real logic to solve a real problem and landed on one of the wildest conclusions in scientific history. 24. Around 2500 BC, a culture, identified only by their distinctive pottery style, appeared suddenly across the entire continent of Europe, from Spain all the way to Poland, in under 200 years. Nobody invited the Bell Beaker people, nobody announced they were coming, they just showed up everywhere at once. DNA analysis later revealed something deeply unsettling about their arrival in Britain specifically. Within just a few generations of the Bell Beaker people appearing on the island, up to 90% of the existing male population had been replaced. The women largely remained. Archaeologists describe this carefully as a migration event and leave the rest to your imagination. 25. In 1926, a retired British Army colonel named James Churchward published a book claiming that 64 million people once lived on a vast Pacific continent called Mu. His entire evidence base was a set of secret stone tablets that an Indian priest had supposedly shown him privately, tablets which conveniently no other living person ever saw or verified. Zero physical evidence of Mu has ever been found anywhere in any ocean. Despite this, the idea refused to die and kept resurfacing in books, cults, and conspiracy theories for the next 100 years. One man invented an entire drowned civilization from memory, and the world simply could not let it go. 26. Egypt traded with a mysterious kingdom called the Land of Punt for over 1,000 consecutive years, importing gold, ivory, exotic animals, and precious incense that was considered more valuable than almost anything else in the ancient world. Egyptian artwork shows Punt's landscape, its people, its animals, and its architecture in remarkable detail across dozens of temples and monuments. Despite having 1,000 years of trading records and detailed visual documentation, modern archaeologists have never confirmed exactly where Punt actually was. Current best guesses include Somalia, Eritrea, and Yemen. Egypt's most important trading partner for 10 centuries, and we genuinely cannot find it on a map. 27. Sumerian texts written thousands of years ago describe a paradise land called Dilmun, where the gods themselves chose to live, a holy place of pure water and eternal life sitting somewhere in the Persian Gulf. For a long time, historians filed this under mythology and moved on. Then, archaeologists started digging seriously in modern Bahrain and found real evidence of an ancient civilization matching the Sumerian descriptions with uncomfortable precision: a wealthy trading hub, elaborate burial mounds, freshwater springs in the middle of the sea, and a culture that connected Mesopotamia with the Indus Valley. The gods apparently had excellent taste in real estate. 28. Sumerian epic poems describe an ancient city called Arata, so magnificent and wealthy that Sumerian kings sent messages to its rulers using the world's earliest known writing system, essentially making Arata the recipient of humanity's first text messages. The poems describe luxury goods, lapis lazuli, gold, and elaborate diplomatic negotiations going back and forth between the two civilizations. Scholars have been searching for the physical location of Arata for over 100 years using every tool available and have found absolutely nothing. the city that received history's first written communications, has itself left no confirmed archaeological trace anywhere on Earth. 29. Someone built a massive city called Tiwanaku at 12,500 feet above sea level in Bolivia using stone blocks weighing up to 200 tons each, moving them to a location where the air is so thin that heavy physical labor becomes genuinely dangerous for modern construction workers with proper equipment. Then, around 1000 AD, this empire collapsed almost overnight with no satisfying explanation in the archaeological record. Its language was never written down. Its religion is reconstructed entirely from guesswork, and its ruling system remains almost completely unknown. An empire that built impossible things at impossible altitude simply stopped existing one day and left almost no explanation behind. 30. The Wari Empire built cities, organized road networks, and managed textile production across enormous stretches of Peru a full 600 years before the Inca showed up and took all the credit. When the Inca rose to power, they did what every ambitious new empire does with the civilization that came before them. They systematically erased the Wari from the historical record, absorbed their infrastructure, adopted their administrative techniques, and presented everything as original Inca innovation. Now, the Inca essentially pulled off one of history's greatest plagiarism moves on an imperial scale, and it worked so completely that most people today have never heard the name Wari. 31. Archaeologists digging in coastal Peru found a civilization called Norte Chico, or Corral, dated to 3500 BC, making it the oldest known civilization in the entire Americas. Older than Egypt's pyramids, older than Stonehenge, older than almost everything else humans built anywhere on Earth. Here is the part that genuinely confuses researchers even today. Across the entire archaeological record of this civilization, spanning centuries of occupation and dozens of excavated sites, not a single weapon has ever been found. No arrowheads, no war clubs, no fortifications, nothing designed to hurt another person. The oldest civilization in the Americas apparently never went to war with anyone. 32. Off the southern coast of Japan, about 25 meters underwater near the island of Yonaguni, there is a stepped stone structure roughly the size of a city block sitting on the ocean floor. Geologists who study it say the whole thing is a natural rock formation shaped by erosion and underwater currents. Other researchers point to what appear to be right angles, flat surfaces, and what look remarkably like tool marks cut into the stone. The argument has been going back and forth for decades, with neither side fully convincing the other. A potentially man-made city-sized structure is sitting underwater, and science cannot agree on whether humans touched it. 33. Ethiopia had an empire called Aksum that was once ranked alongside Rome, Persia, and China as one of the 4 greatest powers on Earth. They built towering obelisks that still stand today, developed their own writing system, minted their own coins, and according to their own national tradition, currently hold the actual Ark of the Covenant in a church in the city of Aksum, where one appointed guardian is allowed to see it and nobody else ever gets in. Aksum controlled Red Sea trade for centuries and shaped the entire Horn of Africa. Most Americans have genuinely never heard its name despite it being one of history's biggest empires. 34. European explorers arriving in Sudan fully expected to find evidence that any great civilization there must have been built by Egyptians, because the idea of an independent African urban civilization did not fit their worldview at all. Then, archaeologists found Kerma, a city predating many Egyptian dynasties entirely, with its own monumental architecture, its own burial traditions, its own political structure, and its own distinct culture that owed nothing to Egypt whatsoever. Africa's oldest known urban civilization had been sitting in Sudan the whole time, completely ignored, because explorers arrived with conclusions already written and spent decades forcing the evidence to fit their predetermined story. 35. About 2,500 years ago in what is now Nigeria, a culture called the Nok produced life-sized terracotta sculptures so sophisticated in their detail, showing elaborate hairstyles, jewelry, and facial expressions, that when Western archaeologists first encountered them, they genuinely struggled to accept the timeline. To the ironworking technology of the Nok culture presented an even bigger problem. It appeared in the archaeological record already fully developed with no primitive early phase, no trial and error period, No gradual improvement visible anywhere in the evidence. An entire advanced metallurgical tradition showed up in West Africa, completely formed as if someone skipped the instruction manual entirely. 36. In 1986, a farmer in China's Sichuan province was digging a drainage ditch when his shovel hit something hard, and the next few years of excavation revealed one of the most genuinely bizarre archaeological discoveries in human history. The Sanxingdui site produced 3,000-year-old bronze masks with enormous protruding tube-shaped eyes that stick out several inches from the face, towering golden trees, and artistic styles completely unlike anything else ever found in Chinese history or connected to any known Chinese cultural tradition. Nobody knows who these people were, where their artistic tradition came from, or where they went. They do not fit anywhere in the official story of ancient China. 37. In 2001, catastrophic floods in southeastern Iran exposed thousands of ancient artifacts eroding out of riverbanks, and archaeologists rushed in to find a civilization called Gyroft that nobody had previously documented properly. The site contained monumental architecture, chlorite vessels with elaborate carved decorations, and what appeared to be its own independent writing system, all potentially older than Sumer, which is currently considered the birthplace of civilization. Oh, if Gyroft's dating holds up under continued analysis, it would completely rewrite the history of where human civilization actually began and push the entire origin story several hundred miles east of where textbooks currently place it. 38. Elam was one of the oldest civilizations on Earth, existing for 3,000 consecutive years right alongside Mesopotamia, trading with them, fighting with them, and occasionally conquering them. It had cities, temples, artwork, and a political system sophisticated enough to challenge the greatest empires of the ancient world repeatedly. Its language, however, is a complete isolate, meaning it is genetically unrelated to every single other language ever spoken on Earth, not part of any known language family, connected to nothing. Linguists can read Elamite but cannot trace where it came from. Yan, a civilization that lasted 3,000 years, spoke a language that appeared to come from absolutely nowhere. 39. Sometime in the 1970s, archaeologists working in the desert regions covering modern Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, and Afghanistan started uncovering the remains of an entire Bronze Age civilization that nobody had previously known existed. The Oxus civilization, also called BMAC, left behind massive walled cities, elaborate temple complexes, and sophisticated artwork spread across an enormous geographic area. It had clearly been a major regional power. Nobody knows where these people came from before building their cities. Nobody knows where they went after the cities were abandoned. An entire civilization covering multiple modern countries was completely absent from the historical record until someone accidentally started digging in the right place. 40. The Assyrian Empire kept detailed records of its enemies and mentioned one particular rival so frequently and with such obvious frustration that historians should have paid much closer attention much sooner. The kingdom of Urartu, in what is now Armenia, was more advanced than Assyria in both metalworking and hydraulic engineering, and built irrigation systems so well designed that farmers in the region are still using them to water crops today, thousands of years after the civilization that built them ceased to exist. Despite being mentioned constantly in Assyrian records as a powerful and sophisticated enemy, say Urartu barely appears in a single history textbook used in American schools. 41. Deep beneath the Sahara Desert in what is now Libya, an ancient civilization called the Garamantes spent centuries doing something so monumentally insane that modern engineers still shake their heads looking at it. They carved a tunnel network called Fogaras, stretching 3,500 kilometers through solid Saharan rock entirely by hand, with no power tools, no explosives, and no modern equipment of any kind, just to reach underground water sources. This system allowed them to farm the Sahara Desert successfully for 1,000 consecutive years. The engineering precision required to maintain a constant downward slope across that distance through solid rock without any modern surveying equipment has never been fully explained by anyone. 42. Sudan has more pyramids than Egypt. That sentence needs a moment to land properly. The Kingdom of Kush built over 200 pyramids along the Nile, significantly more than Egypt ever constructed, and actually conquered Egypt and ruled as pharaohs for 100 straight years. The reason most Americans have never heard any of this is partly because Kushite pyramids are smaller and steeper than Egyptian ones, which caused early European archaeologists to decide they were inferior and therefore less worthy of serious study. An African kingdom that built more pyramids than Egypt, conquered Egypt, and ruled it for a century got dismissed from history books because their pyramids were the wrong shape. 43. Korean history contains one of the most entertainingly strange royal origin stories in the ancient world. The founding legend of the Silla Kingdom states that its first king was discovered as an egg, found beside a white horse on a hill, which is already remarkable enough, but the archaeological evidence found inside Silla. Royal graves tells an even wilder story. Gold crowns of extraordinary craftsmanship, gem-studded ceremonial daggers, and most surprisingly, intact glass vessels that DNA and chemical analysis trace directly back to the Roman Empire, confirming that the Silla Kingdom maintained active trade connections spanning the entire width of the ancient world, from Korea all the way to Rome. 44. France's greatest underwater archaeologist, Frank Gaudio, spent years scanning the Egyptian seabed near Alexandria, and in the year 2000 found something that reconfirmed one of history's most important lost sites. Heraklion, at Egypt's greatest port city for over 1,200 years, mentioned specifically by the historian Herodotus, had been sitting on the Mediterranean floor perfectly preserved. The site contained 64 ancient ships, 700 anchors, gold coins, colossal statues, and temple artifacts, all exactly where they had settled when the city sank. An entire major city that processed Egypt's international trade for over a millennium was lying on the seafloor with its contents basically undisturbed, waiting for someone to look down. 45. In 2001, a Canadian exploration company was scanning the ocean floor off Cuba's western coast looking for shipwrecks when their sonar equipment returned something nobody expected. Stone structures arranged in what appeared to be a perfect geometric grid pattern were sitting 2,000 feet underwater on the seafloor. The discovery was formally announced, made international news, generated enormous scientific interest, and then was completely and totally dropped. No follow-up expedition was properly funded, no serious excavation was organized, no official explanation for the structures was ever published. A potential underwater city off the coast of Cuba was found, announced to the world, and then quietly abandoned, like an awkward conversation nobody wanted to finish. 46. On a collection of 92 artificial islands in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, someone built an entire city called Nan Madol, using basalt logs each weighing up to 50 tons, somehow transporting these enormous stones across open ocean water to stack them into walls, platforms, and ceremonial structures of remarkable sophistication. The modern engineers who have studied the site cannot determine a realistic method by which the stones could have been moved, using any technology available at the time. Local oral tradition on the island fills this gap with a completely straightforward explanation, stating that the founders simply used magic to fly the stones into position. Archaeologists currently have nothing more convincing to offer. 47. Ancient Alexandria had a twin city called Canopus, sitting at the mouth of the Nile that served as one of Egypt's most important religious centers for centuries, attracting pilgrims, traders, and festivals that rivaled Alexandria itself in their scale and importance. Then, over centuries, the land beneath it slowly subsided, and Canopus slid quietly into the Mediterranean Sea, taking its temples, statues, and streets with it. The city sat completely unknown on the seafloor until underwater excavations in the 1990s relocated it and brought up artifacts that confirmed everything ancient writers had described about it. An entire Egyptian religious capital was hiding 20 feet underwater, waiting to be rediscovered by divers with flashlights. 48. Cleopatra was one of the most famous people in all of human history, the subject of movies, plays, paintings, and endless fascination for 2,000 years, and the actual palace where she lived, ruled, schemed, and died is currently sitting under 20 feet of Mediterranean water off the coast of Alexandria. Sphinxes are down there. Columns are down there. Statues of the gods she worshipped are resting on the seafloor alongside the foundations of the rooms where she met Julius Caesar and Mark Antony. And the most romanticized royal residence in history is completely accessible to any scuba diver with basic certification and a boat, and has never been fully excavated. 49. In 1959, the Chinese government made a deliberate decision to flood an entire perfectly preserved Ming Dynasty city called Shicheng, also known as Lion City, by building a hydroelectric dam that raised water levels until 300 meters of water covered everything. Over 300,000 people were relocated from their homes to make room for the reservoir. The city still stands completely intact on the lakebed. Its streets, its archways, its carved wooden buildings and stone lions, all preserved by the cold, still water. China intentionally drowned one of its own most historically significant cities for electricity, and the whole thing is now a popular destination for scuba divers exploring ancient temples on the bottom of a man-made lake. 50. Spanish conquistadors spent enormous resources chasing rumors of an entire city made of gold somewhere in the Amazon jungle, a place they called El Dorado. And historians spent centuries treating this obsession as a classic example of greedy Europeans losing their minds in the tropics. Then modern archaeologists started flying LiDAR scanning equipment over the Amazon canopy, and the results started making everyone who dismissed El Dorado look a little foolish. Massive lost cities with sophisticated road networks, plazas, and organized urban planning began appearing in the scan data beneath the jungle canopy across enormous stretches of the Amazon basin. The Spanish were not entirely wrong, and that fact is currently causing significant academic discomfort. 51. High in the Peruvian Andes, there is a pre-Incan fortress city called Cuelap, sitting 3,000 meters above sea level, bigger than Machu Picchu and older by a full 1,000 years, only reachable today by cable car because the terrain is so extreme. The people who built it, the Chachapoyans, are mentioned in almost zero mainstream history books despite running one of the most impressive mountain civilizations in South American history. The Inca eventually conquered them, but never fully absorbed their culture. A fortress city older and larger than Machu Picchu exists, and most Americans have never once heard its name. 52. In 2015, archaeologists flew LiDAR scanning equipment over a remote stretch of Honduran jungle, and the results showed something massive hiding under the canopy. A lost city now called Ciudad Blanca emerged in the data, and when a team physically entered the site in 2016, they found stone offerings still carefully arranged on the ground, exactly as if the people who placed them had walked away just days earlier. No looting, no disturbance, everything untouched. An entire lost city in Honduras was sitting perfectly preserved in the jungle, and nobody knew it existed until a plane with a fancy laser flew overhead. 53. Colombia has a lost city called Tayuna that is 650 years older than Machu Picchu. Built on a mountain ridge deep in the Sierra Nevada jungle with stone terraces, drainage systems, and roads connecting it to surrounding settlements. Western archaeologists did not discover it through careful research or expedition planning. Drug traffickers stumbled across it in 1972 while moving through the jungle and started looting the graves. The looters sold artifacts on the black market, the artifacts got traced, and archaeologists followed the trail back to one of the most significant pre-Columbian cities ever found. Crime accidentally solved a 650-year-old archaeological mystery. 54. A civilization in Peru built an entire underground labyrinth of tunnels beneath their ceremonial center at Chavín de Huántar, specifically designed to completely disorient any visitor who entered. Priests used hidden water channels running through the walls to create roaring sounds that seemed to come from everywhere at once, mimicking the voice of a god. Archaeological residue analysis confirmed that ritual participants were also consuming psychedelic substances during ceremonies. The whole operation was essentially an ancient, immersive theater experience combining architecture, sound engineering, and hallucinogens to convince visitors they were communicating directly with supernatural beings. It worked extremely well for about 1,000 years. 55. On Ecuador's coast, about 5,500 years ago, a civilization called the Valdivia culture was producing pottery decorated with specific geometric designs. When researchers compared these designs to pottery from the Jomon culture of ancient Japan, They found similarities so striking they could not be easily dismissed as coincidence. The two cultures were separated by 15,000 kilometers of open Pacific Ocean. No confirmed contact between them has ever been proven, and no migration route connecting them has been identified. Two civilizations on opposite sides of the largest ocean on Earth were independently decorating their pottery with nearly identical patterns, and nobody has a satisfying explanation for why. 56. Spanish colonial records describe the Chachapoya people of Peru as tall, fair-skinned, and blue-eyed physical characteristics unlike any other indigenous South American population the Spanish had encountered anywhere else on the continent. While researchers initially dismissed these descriptions as Spanish exaggeration until the mummies started telling a different story. Chachapoya mummies recovered from their cliff-hanging burial sites show lighter hair color and distinct facial bone structure that genuinely differs from surrounding Andean populations. DNA analysis has been conducted, but the results have generated more questions than answers. A population of apparently European-looking people was living in the Peruvian cloud forest, and nobody knows how they got there. 57. The Chimu Empire built Chan Chan on the Peruvian coast, the largest adobe city ever constructed on Earth, covering 20 full square kilometers of carefully planned streets, royal compounds, and ceremonial spaces, and ruled the entire Peruvian coastline for 500 years. Or then the Inca conquered them and did something very deliberate with Chimu history. They systematically destroyed Chimu records, absorbed their administrative techniques, recruited their skilled craftsmen, and presented Chimu innovations as original Inca achievements. The world's largest mud brick city was built by people whose history was intentionally erased by the empire that conquered them, and most of that erasure was permanently successful. 58. At the mouth of the Amazon River, a culture called the Marajoara built massive earthwork mounds and produced ceramic artwork of such technical and artistic complexity that it drew direct comparisons to ancient Greek pottery when Western researchers first encountered it. This completely contradicted the established academic position that the Amazon rainforest environment was too nutrient-poor to support large, complex civilizations. The Marajoara did not read that academic position and built a sophisticated society anyway. Their existence forced a serious rethinking of what the pre-Columbian Amazon actually looked like, and how many other civilizations might still be hiding under the jungle canopy. 59. When Spanish explorers arrived in Colombia, they encountered the Tairona people and sent back reports describing a kingdom larger and more organized than anything they had seen in Europe. The Tairona had built 250 separate villages connected by an elaborate network of stone-paved roads running through steep jungle mountain terrain, all constructed without any metal tools whatsoever. Their political organization was sophisticated enough to coordinate construction across an enormous geographic area. The Spanish described the scale of it with genuine astonishment in letters home. An indigenous Colombian civilization was building infrastructure that impressed people who came from Renaissance Europe, and history barely gives them a footnote. 60. A French cartographer named Philippe Boitier published detailed maps in 1737 showing Antarctica's coastline with remarkable accuracy, a full 70 years before Antarctica was officially discovered by any European expedition. The maps were reportedly based on even older source documents whose origin Boitier never fully explained. The most unsettling detail is that the subglacial coastline shown on Boitier's maps, the actual rock beneath the ice, matches the coastline revealed by modern radar scans penetrating through the Antarctic ice sheet. Either Boitier had access to genuinely ancient source maps made before the ice formed, or the resemblance is the most remarkable coincidence in cartographic history. 61. When European explorers arrived in Zimbabwe, they found a massive city built entirely from perfectly fitted stone, with no mortar holding any of it together. Walls stretching for hundreds of meters, constructed with such precision that they have stood for centuries without a single drop of cement. The explorers looked at Great Zimbabwe and immediately decided Africans could not possibly have built it. They spent the next 100 years publishing elaborate theories crediting Phoenicians, Arabs, and ancient Israelites with the construction instead. Eventually, archaeology proved conclusively that local Shona people built every inch of it. A century of racist alternative history was invented specifically to avoid giving Africans credit for their own city. 62. West Africa had an empire called Ouagadougou, also known as the Ghana Empire, that controlled all the gold and salt trade across the ancient world and accumulated wealth that made European kingdoms look modest by comparison. Arab scholars who personally visited described a king commanding an army of 200,000 men and a court of breathtaking sophistication. This empire is almost completely absent from standard world history curricula taught in American schools today. An empire that dominated global trade for centuries and impressed every foreign visitor who documented it, gets approximately one paragraph in most textbooks, while far less significant European kingdoms get entire chapters. 63. Rome did not simply defeat Carthage in their famous wars. After the final victory, Romans salted the agricultural land to prevent anything from growing, burned every building, destroyed every record, and formally banned the teaching or preservation of Carthaginian history. Everything known about Carthage today comes almost entirely from Roman sources, meaning it comes from Carthage's enemies who had every reason to make them look terrible. An entire superpower civilization that controlled Mediterranean trade, built massive fleets, and produced military geniuses like Hannibal was so thoroughly erased that historians are still trying to reconstruct the basic outline of what Carthaginian society actually looked like from the inside. 64. The Bible describes King Solomon sending ships to a place called Ophir and returning with 420 talents of gold, enough to fund the construction of his famous temple in Jerusalem. Ancient writers treated Ophir as a real and known location. Modern researchers have proposed locations including Arabia, India, Zimbabwe, the Philippines, and remarkably even Peru, as possible candidates for where all that gold actually came from. No confirmed location has ever been identified, no site has produced definitive evidence, and the search has been running for centuries. Solomon's primary gold source, mentioned repeatedly in ancient texts, has never been found and remains one of archaeology's most stubbornly unsolved geographic mysteries. 65. South Africa's first known kingdom created small golden rhino figurines of extraordinary craftsmanship and maintained a sophisticated class-based society where the ruling class was literally buried on an elevated hilltop separate from everyone else. A physical expression of social hierarchy built into the landscape itself. The kingdom is called Mapungubwe, and it flourished nearly 1,000 years ago. The apartheid government of South Africa deliberately suppressed research into Mapungubwe and kept its existence largely hidden from public knowledge for decades, because a sophisticated pre-colonial African kingdom with a complex class system and advanced goldworking directly contradicted the racial narrative they were trying to maintain politically. 66. When British forces arrived at the Benin Kingdom in Nigeria in 1897, they found bronze artwork of such extraordinary technical quality, such precise detail and artistic sophistication, that the officers literally refused to believe Africans had made it. They wrote home suggesting the bronzes must be evidence of a lost European or even Greek colony in West Africa. The bronzes are now sitting in the British Museum in London. The kingdom that produced them was burned to the ground by British forces during the same expedition that removed the artwork. Nigeria has been formally requesting the return of the Benin bronzes for decades, and the British Museum keeps finding reasons to say no. 67. West African art history contains a thread that runs remarkably continuously across 2,500 years, connecting the Nok terracotta tradition directly to the later Yoruba Ife artistic culture through consistent techniques, aesthetic principles, and stylistic choices that suggest an unbroken line of artistic development spanning multiple millennia. This would represent one of the longest continuous artistic traditions ever documented anywhere on Earth. Western archaeology has spent considerably less time investigating and publicizing this connection than it deserves, and which means a 2,500-year African artistic lineage that rivals anything documented in European or Asian art history remains almost entirely unknown outside specialist academic circles. 68. Across enormous stretches of the Sahara Desert, a semi-nomadic North African civilization called the Gaetulians left behind thousands of mysterious stone circles carefully aligned with specific astronomical events, solstices, equinoxes, and star risings demonstrating sophisticated knowledge of celestial cycles. They left no writing, no large settlements, no explanation of their purpose or beliefs, just the stones arranged in patterns that only reveal their astronomical precision when studied from above or measured against the night sky. An ancient North African civilization was tracking the movements of stars and planets across the desert with remarkable accuracy, and then vanished, leaving nothing behind but the stones pointing at the sky. 69. Across Chad and Cameroon, a civilization called the Sao built massive clay fortresses over a period spanning 2,500 years, constructing some of the most formidable defensive architecture in Central African history. Their oral traditions contain a detail that archaeologists find genuinely interesting. The Sao consistently describe their ancestors as coming from a land far to the north, a direction that points directly toward the Sahara Desert, suggesting their civilization may have originated in the Saharan region before it fully desertified and pushed populations southward. A Central African civilization might be the direct descendant of a Saharan culture displaced by one of history's most dramatic environmental transformations. 70. 7,000 years ago, in what is now Egypt's western desert, people built a stone circle in a place called Nabta Playa that is a full 1,000 years older than Stonehenge and was precisely aligned with the summer solstice sunrise with an accuracy that modern astronomers have confirmed through careful measurement. This was built in the middle of the Sahara by people who left almost no other archaeological trace except this single extraordinary astronomical monument. These were possibly Africa's first astronomers, people carefully watching the sky and encoding their observations in stone millennia before Egypt built its first pyramid, are in a region that is now one of the most inhospitable deserts on Earth. 71. Ethiopia's ancient city of Aksum contains obelisks so massive that the largest standing one weighs 160 tons and reaches 24 meters into the sky, quarried from a single piece of stone kilometers away and transported without wheels to its current location. One obelisk that fell during transport measured 33 meters long and weighed an estimated 500 tons, making it the largest single stone object anyone in the ancient world ever attempted to move. Modern engineers with access to current heavy lifting equipment have studied the logistics of moving and erecting these stones and concluded that the method used by the Aksumites has never been successfully replicated by anyone using any technology available today. 72. When Portuguese explorers made first contact with the Kingdom of Congo, in 1483, they encountered something that completely contradicted every assumption they carried with them about African societies. The Kingdom of Congo had a sophisticated centralized government with clearly defined provinces, appointed governors, a functioning currency system, formal diplomatic protocols, and an ambassadorial corps capable of conducting international negotiations. The king sent his own son to Europe as an official ambassador. History textbooks describing pre-colonial Africa almost universally use the word tribes to describe every African political structure, regardless of its actual complexity, a framing that makes the Kingdom of Congo's genuine sophistication essentially invisible to most students. 73. The greatest city of the Indus Valley Civilization, Mohenjo-Daro, in modern Pakistan, had functioning flush toilets connected to a citywide sewage system, standardized brick sizes used consistently across all construction, and urban planning so sophisticated that archaeologists believe a central authority must have governed the entire city in 2500 BC. Europe would not develop comparable sanitation infrastructure for another 4,000 years. Then one day the residents of Mohenjo-Daro apparently left in the middle of whatever they were doing. Archaeologists found food still sitting in vessels, tools left mid-task, personal belongings abandoned exactly in place, as if the entire population of a major city simply decided to leave simultaneously. 74. 12,000 years ago, before agriculture existed, before pottery was widespread, before any of the things archaeologists associate with organized civilization had appeared, somebody organized a large enough workforce to quarry, transport, and precisely carve enormous stone pillars covered in detailed animal carvings and assemble them into circular temple structures at a site in Turkey, now called Göbekli Tepe. This is the oldest known temple on Earth by thousands of years. Then, whoever built it deliberately buried the entire complex under tons of fill dirt to preserve it. Modern archaeology has no explanation for how a pre-agricultural society fed and organized the workforce required to build something this monumentally ambitious. 75. At Çatalhöyük in Turkey, a city occupied continuously for over 2,000 years starting around 7,500 BC, the residents made several urban planning decisions that modern city planners would find deeply unusual. There were no streets anywhere in the entire city. Every resident entered their home by climbing onto the roof and descending through a hole. The dead were buried directly beneath the floors of the rooms where their families continued living and sleeping above them. Perhaps most remarkably, every single house in the city was built to exactly the same size, suggesting a level of enforced social equality that no other ancient urban society has ever demonstrated archaeologically. 76. The world's first true city was a place in ancient Iraq called Uruk, probably the inspiration for the legend of Gilgamesh, the world's oldest written story, and most likely the birthplace of writing itself. At its peak, Uruk had 80,000 residents, making it by far the largest human settlement that had ever existed on Earth at that time. It had monumental architecture, specialized craft production, long-distance trade networks, and a complex administrative system requiring the invention of record-keeping. Despite being arguably the single most important city in human history, the place where urban civilization essentially began, Uruk receives minimal coverage in standard American history education. 77. Sumerian texts identify a city called Eridu as the very first city ever built on Earth, constructed by the gods themselves as humanity's original urban settlement. Modern archaeology confirmed that Eridu is indeed the oldest city in Mesopotamia, predating even Uruk, with occupation layers going back 7,500 years. Or excavations have revealed continuous habitation stretching across millennia, with temples built on top of earlier temples in an unbroken sequence of religious construction. Then, at a certain point, the occupation layers simply stop. The oldest confirmed city in human history, the place Sumerians believed the gods founded civilization, was eventually abandoned, and the reason why remains genuinely unclear. 78. The world's first empire, the Akkadian Empire, built by Sargon of Akkad, spanned millions of square kilometers and represented the most ambitious political achievement in human history up to that point. Then it collapsed completely within a single generation around 2150 BC. A 4,000-year-old clay tablet describes the disaster in vivid terms, mentioning agricultural failure, mass starvation, and cities being abandoned. Modern geologists analyzing sediment cores from the region confirmed a catastrophic 300-year drought beginning at exactly that time, triggered by volcanic activity affecting global climate patterns. An ancient scribe recorded the end of the world's first empire, and modern geology confirmed the scribe was telling the truth. 79. A Bronze Age city in Syria called Ugarit invented the world's first alphabet around 1400 BC, a system of symbols representing individual sounds that became the direct ancestor of Phoenician, then Greek, then Latin, and ultimately every alphabet currently used anywhere on Earth, including the one these words are written in right now. Without Ugarit's invention, written communication as humans currently practice it would not exist in its present form. And then one day, around 1185 BC, something destroyed Ugarit, so suddenly and completely that bread was still sitting in the ovens when the city died. The inventor of all human alphabets was wiped out mid-sentence. 80. In 1974, archaeologists digging at a site in Syria called Ebla hit one of the most significant finds in Middle Eastern archaeological history. A royal archive containing 17,000 clay tablets describing a kingdom of 250,000 people with sophisticated trade networks reaching Egypt and Mesopotamia, diplomatic correspondence with major powers, and administrative records of breathtaking complexity. Nobody had known Ebla existed before that shovel went into the ground. The tablets rewrote the history of the entire ancient Middle East and pushed back the timeline of urban civilization in Syria by centuries. An entire kingdom of 250,000 people with international diplomatic connections had been completely absent from the historical record until someone started digging in the right field. 81. The Bible, the Quran, and Ethiopian royal tradition all describe the kingdom of Sheba as a fabulously wealthy realm ruled by a queen powerful enough to visit King Solomon as an equal. Ancient texts from multiple independent civilizations all confirm its existence. Modern archaeologists believe it was located in present-day Yemen based on available evidence. Despite centuries of searching, no confirmed capital city has ever been found. No palace, no throne room, nothing matching the scale described. One of the most famous kingdoms in all of religious history has left almost no physical trace anywhere. 82. Sumerian merchants wrote about importing copper from a place called Magan for 800 consecutive years, making it one of the longest-running trade relationships documented in ancient records. Modern Oman contains extensive evidence of massive ancient copper smelting operations perfectly consistent with being Sumer's primary metal supplier for 8 centuries. Despite this, the actual Magan civilization, its cities, its people, its political structure has never been properly excavated or studied. Archaeologists know exactly what Sumer bought from Magan and roughly where Magan was located, but the civilization itself remains almost completely uninvestigated, sitting in the Omani desert, waiting for someone to show up. 83. Sumerians described a wealthy seafaring civilization called Meluha that supplied them with carnelian, gold, and timber for centuries through sophisticated maritime trade routes across the ancient Indian Ocean. Most scholars believe Meluha was the Indus Valley civilization based on geographic and archaeological circumstantial evidence. The problem is that no direct physical proof connecting the two has ever been confirmed. The Indus script remains undeciphered, so any documents that might prove the connection cannot be read. Two of the ancient world's greatest civilizations were almost certainly trading partners for centuries, and archaeology cannot currently prove it beyond reasonable doubt. 84. In China's Taklamakan Desert, mummies with blonde and red hair, long noses, and distinctly Western European physical features have been found dating to 2000 BC, a full 1,000 years before the Silk Road connected East and West. DNA analysis confirmed these were not Asian people. They were genetically Western European, found in the middle of China 4,000 years ago with absolutely no explanation for how they got there or why they stayed. Ancient Chinese texts describe people matching this description in Western territories. Western Europeans were apparently living deep inside China 2 millennia before any known contact between the two civilizations existed. 85. China's Longshan culture, known for their extraordinarily thin black pottery so refined it looks almost modern, built massive city walls, practiced oracle bone divination, and developed sophisticated social hierarchies across a wide region predating the famous Shang dynasty. Then they vanished from the archaeological record completely, replaced by an entirely different culture with no visible transition period, no gradual change, no hybrid phase showing one culture slowly becoming another. An advanced Chinese civilization simply stopped appearing in the evidence, and a completely different one took its place with no explanation for what happened in between or where the Longshan people actually went. 86. In the middle of Mauritania's Sahara Desert, there is a geological formation called the Risha structure, a massive circular feature visible from space consisting of concentric rings of rock measuring roughly 50 kilometers across. Plato's description of Atlantis mentions a city built on concentric rings of alternating land and water of specific dimensions, located on a flat plain near the Atlantic Ocean. The Risha structure sits on a flat plain, near the Atlantic, matches the general dimensions, and fits the geographic description remarkably well. Geologists firmly maintain it is natural erosion. The resemblance to Plato's description, however, remains specific enough to keep researchers arguing. 87. Around 10,800 BC evidence found on 4 separate continents, including microscopic diamonds that only form under cosmic impact conditions, and tiny spherical particles created by extreme heat suggest a comet or asteroid exploded over North America, triggering a 1,200-year cold period called the Younger Dryas. This event killed the woolly mammoths and most other large mammals of the Ice Age. Some researchers propose it also ended a pre-existing human civilization, advanced enough to leave traces but not sophisticated enough to survive the catastrophe. The physical evidence for the impact itself is now widely accepted, but its implications for human prehistory remain deeply controversial among archaeologists. 88. Every archaeology textbook operates on the assumption that civilization required agriculture first, that humans needed food surpluses before they could organize large workforces for monumental construction projects. Göbekli Tepe destroyed this assumption completely. The site was built 12,000 years ago by people who were still hunter-gatherers with no confirmed agricultural system, no stored food surpluses, and no permanent settlements nearby. Someone fed, housed, and organized potentially hundreds of workers to quarry and carve massive stone pillars over an extended period without any of the infrastructure archaeologists previously considered necessary. The foundation of how humans understand civilizational development has never fully recovered from this discovery. 89. In 2010, scientists analyzing a single finger bone found in Denisova Cave in Siberia discovered genetic material belonging to a previously completely unknown species of human. The Denisovans were neither Homo sapiens nor Neanderthals, but a third distinct human species that interbred with both. Their tools recovered from the same cave were more sophisticated than contemporary Neanderthal tools found elsewhere. Modern humans across Asia and the Pacific still carry Denisovan DNA in measurable amounts. An entire human species was completely unknown to science until a decade ago, and their full story, where they lived, how they organized, what they built, remains almost entirely undiscovered. 90. A geologist, Robert Schoch, analyzed the weathering patterns on the Great Sphinx of Egypt and found erosion caused specifically by heavy rainfall rather than wind and sand. The last time Egypt received enough rainfall to cause that kind of erosion was between 7,000 and 9,000 years ago, thousands of years before the civilization that supposedly built the Sphinx existed. If Schoch is correct, the Sphinx is dramatically older than official dating suggests and was built by a sophisticated civilization that preceded ancient Egypt entirely. Mainstream Egyptologists strongly dispute this conclusion. The erosion patterns, however, remain a genuine geological puzzle that has never been fully resolved by either side. 91. For decades, the accepted story about Easter Island described the Rapa Nui people as a tragic cautionary tale of self-destruction. A civilization that chopped down every tree, exhausted every resource, and collapsed through their own overpopulation and greed. This narrative appeared in textbooks, documentaries, and popular science books worldwide. Then, in 2024, a Columbia University study completely overturned it. New evidence showed the island's population was never larger than about 4,000 people and remained stable for centuries. The actual collapse came when Europeans arrived and introduced diseases. An entire civilization had been falsely blamed for its own extinction for decades by researchers who got the story completely wrong. 92. The Indus Valley Civilization covered an area larger than ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia combined, supported an estimated population of 5 million people, and produced thousands of clay seals and tablets written in a script used consistently across their entire territory. Despite having more written material than any other undeciphered ancient script currently known, researchers have never confirmed the meaning of a single word. Every proposed translation has been rejected by the wider academic community. 5 million people left behind an enormous written record, and humanity collectively cannot read one sentence of it. The most populated ancient civilization has essentially told us nothing about itself. 93. Mummies recovered from Peru's Paracas Desert presented physical characteristics so unusual that researchers initially assumed the elongated skulls were achieved through the ancient practice of head binding, where boards are strapped to infant skulls to reshape them over time. Then measurements revealed the cranial volume of Paracas skulls was 25% larger than anatomically normal human skulls, a difference head binding cannot create because binding only changes shape without adding volume. DNA tests conducted in 2018 returned results matching no known human population currently in any database anywhere on Earth. The Paracas people appear to have been biologically distinct from every other human population ever documented. 94. Throughout the 1800s, European biblical scholars pointed to the fact that no archaeological evidence for the Hittites existed anywhere outside Scripture as proof that the Bible contained fictional, historical claims. The Hittites were mentioned constantly in Old Testament accounts as a major empire and powerful military force, but zero physical evidence supported their existence. Then, in 1906, archaeologists digging in Turkey found the Hittite capital city of Hattusa, containing 10,000 clay tablets describing an empire that had genuinely dominated the ancient Middle East for centuries. An entire empire that European scholars confidently declared fictional turned out to be completely real and one of history's most significant powers. 95. In 1999, oceanographer Robert Ballard, the same man who found the Titanic, was exploring the Black Sea floor when his equipment detected something unexpected 300 feet underwater. Ancient structures appeared in the data: wooden beams, stone tools, and building remains dating to before 5,600 BC, when geologists believe the Mediterranean Sea catastrophically burst through the Bosphorus Strait, flooding the Black Sea basin and destroying everything living along its former shoreline. People had been farming and building settlements on that land for thousands of years before the flood erased everything. Ballard may have found physical evidence of one of history's most catastrophic flood events preserved on the seafloor. 96. The Nabateans carved their famous city of Petra from solid rose red rock in the Jordanian desert and simultaneously engineered a water management system of such extraordinary sophistication that it successfully supported 30,000 people in a region receiving only 10 centimeters of annual rainfall. They collected literally every drop of dew, channeled every trickle from rare storms, and stored water in cisterns carved throughout the surrounding cliffs. When Rome finally conquered the Nabateans, Roman engineers could not maintain the water system, and Petra's population collapsed within generations. The greatest empire in the ancient world conquered a city and then could not operate its plumbing. 97. Ancient Hindu texts describe Dwarka as the magnificent underwater kingdom of the god Krishna, swallowed by the sea after his death. A story treated for centuries as pure religious mythology with no historical basis. Then in 1983, archaeologists conducting surveys in India's Gulf of Khambat found a submerged city with carbon-dated wood returning an age of approximately 9,000 years, making it potentially older than any other known urban settlement on Earth. The discovery generated enormous excitement in India and significant skepticism internationally. A city described in religious texts as mythological may be sitting on the seafloor, and the debate about its significance has never been properly resolved. 98. In 2001, Indian oceanographers conducting sonar surveys off the country's northwestern coast detected something extraordinary: an underwater city approximately 40 kilometers long sitting on the Gulf of Khambat seafloor. The Indian government formally announced it as a major archaeological discovery, potentially rewriting the history of early human civilization in South Asia. International scientific interest was immediate and intense. Then, full-scale excavation was never funded, follow-up surveys were never completed, and the discovery quietly disappeared from mainstream archaeological discussion. A potential underwater city 40 kilometers long was found, officially announced by a national government, and then essentially abandoned without any serious investigation. 99. Tamil literary tradition preserves detailed accounts of a civilization called Kumari Kandam, describing it as a landmass south of India that supported human civilization for 30,000 years before being swallowed by the Indian Ocean in a series of catastrophic floods. Tamil scholars point to the extreme antiquity of their literary tradition as evidence that cultural memory of this lost land survived the disaster. Modern geological research confirmed that land did genuinely exist south of India's current coastline, exposed during lower sea levels of the last ice age. The land was real. Whether 30,000 years of civilization existed on it remains completely unconfirmed by any physical evidence. 100. Fishermen living near the Indian coastal town of Mahabalipuram had told the same story for generations, describing 7 pagodas visible beneath the waves just offshore. Ancient temples their ancestors had watched slip beneath the surface centuries ago. Archaeologists treated this as folklore until December 2004, when the Indian Ocean tsunami struck the coastline. As the massive wave pulled water dramatically away from the shore before impact, multiple stone temple structures briefly emerged from the seafloor, exactly where the fishermen had always said they would be. A generational oral tradition that scientists had dismissed as mythology was confirmed as accurate historical memory in the most dramatic way imaginable. 101. The Hopewell culture of Ohio built the largest earthwork complex in all of North America, a series of geometric shapes and ceremonial enclosures aligned precisely with lunar cycles across hundreds of square kilometers. Simultaneously, these same people maintained active trade networks stretching from the Rocky Mountains all the way to the Atlantic coast, moving obsidian, copper, shells, and exotic materials across the entire continent. They did all of this without writing, without wheels, and without metal tools. An ancient Ohio civilization was running a continental trading empire and building lunar observatories out of dirt, and nobody put this in the American history curriculum. 102. Around 3000 BC, a group of steppe warriors called the corded ware culture migrated into Europe, and ancient DNA extracted from burial sites tells a story that archaeologists describe very carefully using neutral academic language. The earliest corded ware burial sites in Jutland contained almost exclusively male skeletons. Within a few generations, their DNA had replaced nearly the entire previous European population. The previous inhabitants had built the megalithic monuments, the stone circles, the long barrows. The corded ware people moved in, took everything, and the original builders of Europe's most famous prehistoric monuments essentially ceased to exist as a distinct population. 103. 5,000 years ago, a Neolithic culture called the funnel beaker people built megalithic tombs across northern Europe. Massive stone burial chambers that required extraordinary communal effort and sophisticated organizational capacity to construct. Then, the corded ware migration happened, and the funnel beaker people were genetically replaced so completely that modern Europeans carry almost none of their DNA. Their tombs, however, survived. The monuments these people spent generations building are still standing across Denmark, Sweden, and Germany today, visited by tourists who are almost certainly not descended from the people who built them. Or they built the monuments and someone else inherited everything. 104. The Mississippian culture built temple mound complexes across the entire American Southeast for 1,000 consecutive years, constructing sophisticated ceremonial centers at dozens of locations from the Gulf Coast to the Great Lakes region. They also invented a disc and spear game called Chunky that became so wildly popular it spread to nearly every other culture across North America, making it arguably the continent's first viral cultural export. Then, before European explorers arrived to document them properly, the Mississippian culture vanished from the archaeological record. An entire civilization that dominated the American Southeast for 10 centuries and invented North America's most popular game disappeared without a documented explanation. On 105. Every major Greek historian, including Herodotus and Pindar, wrote about a perfect civilization called Hyperborea, located beyond the North Wind, describing its inhabitants as immortal, perpetually happy people living in a paradise of eternal spring untouched by disease or conflict. Multiple, independent Greek writers described it with enough geographic consistency to suggest they were not simply inventing the same fantasy separately. Whether Hyperborea was a real northern culture whose reputation became mythologized through repeated retelling, a philosophical ideal dressed in geographic clothing, or something else entirely has never been resolved. Greek civilization's greatest minds all agreed it existed, and modern scholarship still cannot definitively say they were wrong. 106. The ancient city of Rungholt was a thriving Danish trading center, wealthy enough to appear in multiple medieval records as a significant regional power in the North Sea economy. Then, on the night of January 16, 1362, a catastrophic storm surge struck the coastline, and Rungholt was swallowed by the sea in a single night. Medieval writers describe the disaster in apocalyptic terms. For centuries afterward, historians debated whether Rungholt had ever really existed or was simply a cautionary legend about pride and divine punishment. Then, in the 20th century, underwater archaeologists confirmed the ruins were genuinely real, finding the actual remains of Denmark's own Atlantis beneath the North Sea. 107. Sound around 1200 BC, an unidentified group described only as coming from the sea appeared simultaneously across the eastern Mediterranean and proceeded to destroy the Hittite Empire, collapse the Mycenaean civilization, burn the city of Ugarit to the ground, and very nearly conquer Egypt, which only survived because Ramesses III managed to repel them in a desperate battle. These sea peoples, as they are called, destabilized an entire interconnected Bronze Age world in what historians now call the Bronze Age collapse. Their actual identity, where they came from, what language they spoke, and where they went afterward remains one of the greatest unsolved mysteries in the entire archaeological record. 108. 19,000 years before Christopher Columbus sailed anywhere, our ancient DNA evidence and site dating confirms humans were already living across the Americas. Official archaeology spent decades insisting the first Americans arrived 13,000 years ago through a specific land bridge route and resisted contradicting evidence with remarkable stubbornness. Sites in Chile, South Carolina, and elsewhere kept returning dates that broke the official timeline completely. The resistance to updating this timeline was so fierce that researchers who published contradicting evidence faced serious professional consequences for years. The entire story of who first came to America and when they arrived is still being rewritten, and the rewriting is making a lot of established careers very uncomfortable. 109. The ancient city of Poverty Point in Louisiana represents one of the most staggering engineering achievements in North American prehistory. Around 1700 BC, someone coordinated the movement of 53 million cubic feet of earth entirely by hand to construct a series of perfectly concentric, C-shaped ridges and a massive bird-shaped mound visible from the air. No evidence of permanent large-scale settlement surrounds the site. No obvious agricultural base supported the workforce. Archaeologists cannot explain how the labor was organized, what motivated the construction, or where the builders lived while doing it. The greatest earthwork in ancient North America was built by people who left almost no other evidence of their existence. 110. Cahokia, sitting directly across the Mississippi River from modern St. Louis, was in 1250 AD, a city with more residents than London, England had at the exact same moment in history. Its central Monk's Mound is larger by total volume than the Great Pyramid of Giza. Native American oral traditions were never seriously consulted by early archaeologists who preferred digging to listening. Within 200 years of reaching its absolute peak population, Cahokia was completely and totally abandoned, with no confirmed explanation. The greatest city in pre-Columbian North America, larger than any European city of its time, vanished, and American school children are still not told it existed. 111. The pre-Clovis site discoveries keep coming, and each new confirmed date makes the official story look worse. A site in South Carolina returned dates suggesting human presence 50,000 years ago. Researchers who published these findings faced immediate and fierce pushback from the archaeological establishment. The entire framework of American prehistory, who came first, which route they used when they arrived, is currently collapsing under the weight of contradicting evidence from multiple continents. Every year, a new dig somewhere in the Americas returns a date that breaks the previous accepted timeline. The first Americans were here far earlier than anyone officially admitted, and the full truth has not been told yet. And here is the part nobody talks about. Every single civilization on this list was called a myth, a legend, or a mistake by the experts, right up until the moment someone dug in the right spot. Which means right now, today, there are more lost cities, more erased empires, and more rewritten timelines sitting underground or underwater just waiting to make every history textbook on Earth look completely ridiculous again. So here is your question. Drop it in the comments right now. Which one of these 111 civilizations made you say, wait, why did nobody tell me this before? If your answer is Cahokia, you are legally required to share this video with every American you know. Hit subscribe because dumb history is just getting started, and the next video is going to make this one look like a warm-up.